Our next speaker, Richard Norton Taylor. I'm sure many of you will have read Richard's works. He's a writer on security and defence at The Guardian. Welcome, Richard.
I'm speaking in a personal capacity, as The Guardian has yet come out with an editorial view, which it will very soon, so if you can bombard the letters editor with letters the next few days or week or so, it will be very, very good. I'll start with what should be a platitude, but it isn't. From the point of view of morality, legality, practicality, military and credibility as a deterrent, Trident fails or is irrelevant on all counts. From the point of view of most senior Labour figures and many Conservatives, however, it's all about status and fear of alleged public opinion and jobs, which I'll come back to. They back Trident renewal not because nuclear weapons have any practical use or even theoretically is a credible deterrent. Tony Blair said in his biography, A Journey, he questioned Trident's use and purpose. In his memoir, he said, "The expense is huge and the utility non-existent in terms of military use. In the end, he thought giving it up, though, would be too big a downgrading of our status as a nation." Bruce mentioned these points about status just now. Andy Burnham said during the Labour leadership contest that voting against Trident was incompatible with Britain's permanent membership of the UN Security Council, which of course is rubbish, not least because every member of the Council has a veto, including presumably on any proposal to push the UK off that particular top table. Ministers in the top brass say, as Bruce also pointed out, France cannot be the only European country with nuclear weapons, but why not? The Frenchmen actually realise that is a total waste of money, something they can't afford. Ministers argue nuclear weapons are what they say is what they call the ultimate insurance. But you don't build hundreds more hospitals in case of the possibility of some possible future pandemic, for example, or have armed cops at every corner in case of a terrorist attack. The future of Britain's Trident nuclear arsenal is the most important issue facing the country, Michael Fallon, the Defence Secretary, said before the general election. The nuclear deterrent has never been needed more than it is today, he said during a visit surrounded by journalists at the Trident base on the Clyde in January. And Fallon and Cameron repeat a mantra first uttered by General Sir Nicholas Houghton, the outgoing Chief of Defence Staff. The whole thing about deterrence rests on the credibility of its use. When people say you are never going to use a deterrent, what I say is you use a deterrent every second of every minute of every day. The purpose of the deterrent is that you don't have to use it because you successfully deter. So you get the rather oxymoronic claim that you are using Britain's nuclear arsenal by not using it. It is deployed as a desperate attempt to defend the principle of nuclear deterrence. You are using Britain's nuclear arsenal every day, but actually you can't use it, because that means if you use it, the deterrent has failed. Thatcher laid the key of the first Trident submarine HMS Vanguard in Barrow in December '86. Earlier that year, an eloquent case for its cancellation, I would say, was made in the first episode of Yes, Prime Minister, where the fictional Prime Minister Jim Hacker battled with his top civil servant Sir Humphrey Appleby. "I've decided to cancel Trident," Hacker tells an astonished Sir Humphrey. He said he intends to divert some of the saves into conventional forces. "It's a deterrent," Sir Humphrey insists. Hacker, "It's a bluff. I probably wouldn't use it." Humphrey, "But yes, but they don't know that you probably wouldn't." Hacker, "They probably do." Humphrey, "Yes, they probably know that you probably wouldn't, but they can't certainly know." Hacker, "They probably certainly know that I probably wouldn't." Humphrey, "Yes, but even though they probably certainly know that you probably wouldn't, they don't certainly know that, although you probably wouldn't, there's no probability that you certainly would." Hacker, "What? Exactly. Horton last year broke the taboo that military figures do not publicly express views on controversial policies. He told the Andrew Marr Show his intervention, actually, I think, was pretty significant, given the tradition and the constitutional convention that British military bosses do not comment on Trident. They consistently said, and have said in the past, that it's nothing to do with us, Trident is a political matter, not at all a military one. But the extraordinary comments of Fallon, Horton and others reflect increasing concern that opponents of the government's plan to build 4 new Trident subs, officially estimated to cost at least 31 billion, but likely to cost rather more, are winning their rational arguments, despite the pro-Trident position of most on the official opposition's front bench. Christian Blunt, Tory chairman of the Commons Foreign Affairs Committee, estimates Trident renewal will cost 167 billion over its lifespan. He says, it is no longer sensible to put aside the money for Trident for the size of nation we are. At what point is it no longer value for money for the UK? In my judgment, we have reached that point. The Trident debate does not divide opinion on predictably left-wing or right-wing lines, though the government would like it to be. Michael Portillo, the former Conservative Defence Secretary, said last year, our independent deterrent is not independent and doesn't constitute a deterrent. The former Labour Foreign Secretary David Owen says he doesn't believe in renewing Trident. Trident, of course, is supremely irrelevant to combating the main threat to Britain's security, which, as also Bruce pointed out, a threat which, according to Cameron, will last a generation. That is a threat from ISIS and other violent jihadist groups. And they will still be the main security threat. This is according to Cameron himself, when a new Trident fleet starts to sail in the 2030s, if the decision goes ahead. And such groups are not going to be deterred by any nuclear weapon, least of all such intercontinental ballistic missiles as Trident. The US is developing a new generation of hugely expensive, small, relatively low-yield nuclear weapons, weapons whose use some argue will be less likely because of the real threat they could pose, though others argue that their more accurate targeting will make them more tempting to use. What is the UK government's about this? UK government's view about this? We have no idea. A recent survey by the think tank BASIC found that nuclear weapons are only regarded as relevant to the next UK-US generation because of uncertainty caused, generation of people, I mean, not of weapons, because of uncertainty caused by the leakage of such weapons to non-nuclear states or terrorist groups. Debates about nuclear weapons were seen as the preserve of experts able to navigate esoteric deterrence theory. BASIC concluded the magnitude of the nuclear threat is intangible. No units exist with which we can measure it. So the issue becomes an emotive, subjective one, making it all but impossible to scale a rational response. The real threats to the security of Britain and its allies are terrorism and cyber warfare, which could sabotage Trident control systems, as well as such vital elements of the country's infrastructure as power plants and water supplies. Drones will be used increasingly not only as weapon systems, but also more usefully in intelligence gathering. Surveillance technology, the very opposite end of the military security spectrum to Trident, is the best way to prevent and prepare for hostile attacks. For years, Britain's defence equipment budget will be dominated by Trident subs if the decision goes ahead this year, and the two large aircraft carriers being built for the Navy. Both will be increasingly vulnerable. Trident from cyber attacks, underwater drones, and surveillance technology being developed. What the Navy needs to combat real threats are surface ships. As Lord Richard Houghton's predecessor said more than once, we have £1 billion destroyers trying to sort out pirates in a little dhow with rocket-propelled grenades costing $50, with an outboard motor costing $100. To help pay for weapon systems such as Trident and large aircraft carriers, designed to flatter than for real military use, successive governments have slashed the number of Navy frigates to just 19. We now learn that the Navy's entire fleet of 6 Type 45 destroyers costing £1 billion each are to be fitted with new engines because they keep breaking down. At least that could provide jobs. Pro-Trident spokesman, notably Admiral West of Spithead, great title, argued that the Treasury, former First Seal, argued that the Treasury would simply keep any money saved by refusing to renew Trident. But such a move would contradict the government's pledge to spend 2% of GNP on defence. If it did not spend it on Trident, it would be obliged to spend it on other, more useful, perhaps, defence equipment. Skilled jobs which might be lost if Trident is not renewed could be redeployed to other military projects, including nuclear-powered but not nuclear-armed submarines such as the Astute class on surface ships we so badly need, and developing smaller maritime defence systems. Perhaps the jobs could go on building civil power stations. People won't necessarily agree here, but at least while thousands of skilled jobs are devoted to build a nuclear-powered nuclear weapons arsenal, while the UK has to rely on French and Chinese to build civil nuclear power stations. And as for independence, Portillo's point, Portillo's point about not being independent at all, and BASIC's cross-party Trident Commission concluded in 2014 that the life expectancy of the UK's nuclear capability, if it was truly independent, could be measured in just months. Peter Hennessy, the author of The Silent Deep, A History of the Navy's Subs, was told by David Young, a former nuclear weapons policy official, that he would be very surprised if the US President had the capacity to prevent the launch of a Royal Navy missile. He added, but they could do slow starvation. Ingenuity couldn't get you round the bend. It would be finito. And when Harold Macmillan, the Prime Minister, was negotiating a deal with the US on Polaris, Trident's predecessor, documents show that his private secretary, Philip de Zulueta, noted in a secret memo, the United Kingdom independent is fully integrated with the American. An independent British plan does not exist. And here I may end with a couple of quotes. The first addressed to those perhaps concerned about morality and religious faith, and the other to Marx's current or former ones. A former non-proliferation expert at Los Alamos laboratory in America, James Doyle, recently wrote in the Bulletin of Atomic Scientists, "We must, as Pope Francis has said, counter the logic of fear with the ethic of responsibility. The practical next step," Doyle said, "is to demand negotiations on a global convention against nuclear weapons. 121 nations have expressed their willingness to adopt such a ban by joining the humanitarian pledge against nuclear weapons initiated by Austria in 2014. Doyle added, "Jeremy Corbyn, a new British Labour leader who said publicly that under no circumstances would he order an attack with Britain's sub-based nuclear missiles, has been widely criticised. Britain's Defence Secretary, Michael Fallon, called Corbyn a serious threat to our national security. In essence, Fallon, like all who embrace the logic of nuclear deterrence, is promoting the psychology of fear at the expense of morality, and claiming we have no alternative but to place our security in the hands of people willing to use the bomb. Nonsense," says Doyle. "We all have the right to choose the ethic of responsibility and employ morality in our politics. Like Corbyn, we must find the courage to do so." My second reference is to Khrushchev's warning to Fidel Castro in 1963, the year after the Cuban Missile Crisis, in response to Castro urging the Soviet Union to fire nuclear weapons if the US invaded Cuba with conventional forces. "It would be the start of a thermonuclear war," said Khrushchev. "No doubt the Cuban people would die heroically, but we are not struggling against imperialism in order to die." Would any hostile power attack or threaten to attack Britain with nuclear weapons, and would it be deterred because Britain had nuclear weapons? Or Britain without or with nuclear weapons? No and no and no, I say. Yeah.
Thanks very much.